Ethan Ward spent most mornings the same way, riding his old bay horse along the fence line of his ranch. The land stretched wide and quiet around him, rolling hills, dry grass, and the distant shapes of cattle moving slowly under the sun. He liked this silence. It gave him space to think, to breathe, and to keep his mind steady. For years, he had lived alone, and though the loneliness sometimes stung, he had learned to live with it. On this particular afternoon, he planned nothing more than checking the north pasture, fixing a few loose boards, and maybe stopping by the creek if the heat grew too strong. But life had a habit of surprising him when he least expected it. As he guided his horse around a bend in the trail, he heard something that made him straighten in the saddle, a woman's voice calling out, faint but tense. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't fear. It sounded more like someone trying hard to stay calm while dealing with a difficult situation. "Hello?" Ethan called back, his voice steady. Another call came, clearer now. "I need your help." He nudged his horse forward until he saw her, a tall, broad-shouldered woman, standing beside a heavy wooden wagon. The wagon was stuck between two large rocks, its front axle tilted at an odd angle. Dust covered the wheels and the hem of her dress, and strands of dark hair clung to her forehead from sweat. She stood nearly as tall as Ethan, maybe even a bit taller by an inch or two. Her strong frame made her look like someone used to hard work, someone who could lift more than most men in town. But at that moment, she looked tired, frustrated, and maybe even a little embarrassed to be calling a stranger. When she saw him approaching, she raised her hand slightly and said, with a firm but uneasy voice, "Don't move." Ethan stopped his horse out of pure instinct. Her tone wasn't harsh, it was worried. She pointed to something on the ground near her boot. Ethan looked closer and understood immediately. An injured young deer lay on its side, trembling gently but breathing. It must have been hit or frightened by something, and in its panic, it had stumbled near her wagon wheel. "I didn't want to scare it more," the woman explained. "It can't move." Ethan nodded, sliding down from his horse. Her eyes widened, as if she hadn't expected him to come closer. But he did anyway. Calm and unhurried. He tied the reins to a nearby post and walked over to her. "You did the right thing," he said gently. "Just stay still for a moment." She blinked, almost surprised by his quiet confidence. Most men would have panicked or stepped back. But Ethan crouched beside the deer, without fear, without hesitation, and studied its leg. The woman watched him closely, unsure what to make of him. He was not a man of many expressions. His face had the steady look of someone who had lived through storms, real ones, and the emotional kind. She noticed the roughness of his hands and the sun-worn lines on his neck and arms. He looked strong, but more than that, he looked dependable. The deer's leg was trapped under the wagon in a way that could worsen the injury if moved wrong. The animal flinched but didn't try to run, almost sensing the softness in his touch. "What happened?" he asked. "I was trying to move the wagon," she said with a sigh. "But I didn't see the poor thing there. By the time I heard it, the wheel had already frightened it." She swallowed hard, guilt clouding her expression. "I didn't want it to suffer." "No one wants that," Ethan replied. He looked up at her, really noticing her for the first time. She was tall. Yes, but her eyes held a quiet sadness that softened everything else about her. Her clothes were simple, worn at the seams. Her hands, though large and strong, trembled slightly, as if exhausted beyond her limits. "Your wagon axle's wedged tight," Ethan said. "Mind giving me a moment? I think I can help both." The woman nodded. "Please. I'm Mara Hale." Ethan Ward. There were no extra words between them. They didn't need any. Ethan assessed the rocks trapping the wagon wheel. He placed his shoulder under the wooden beam and slowly lifted. His muscles strained, but he managed to raise it just enough to loosen the weight trapping the deer. Mara stared, genuinely astonished. She had expected him to ask for her help, or at least show some hesitation. Instead, he lifted with a calm strength she had rarely seen in anyone. Once the wheel was free, Ethan carefully lifted the deer's leg and guided it out. The little creature tried to stand, but failed. Ethan stroked its head until it relaxed again. "It'll be okay." Mara crouched beside him, her tall frame folding awkwardly but gently. "How did you stay so calm?" she asked, in a quiet voice, almost afraid she sounded foolish. He shrugged lightly. Mara looked at him with a respect she did not hide. She had met many men since moving to this valley, traders, laborers, travelers, but none carried themselves like this quiet rancher who simply did what needed to be done without expecting praise. While Ethan used a cloth from his saddlebag to wrap the deer's leg lightly, Mara explained more about herself. She had moved into a small cabin near the old cottonwood grove. After her husband passed away from illness 2 winters ago, she tried to keep their old homestead running. But alone, the work became overwhelming. She finally sold the land and moved somewhere quieter, somewhere far from the memories that kept hurting her. Ethan listened. Not with pity, but with patience. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply let her speak, something she hadn't done freely in months. He freed the wagon, adjusting the axle with practiced skill. Dust rose as the wheel shifted back into place. Mara stood, brushing off her hands, and stared at him in quiet astonishment. "You helped me more than you know." Ethan smiled faintly, just doing what anyone would. But Mara knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would stop. Not everyone would care. Not everyone would take the time to kneel beside a frightened deer or help a stranger with a broken wagon in the middle of nowhere. She felt something stir in her chest, an unexpected warmth, a small piece of hope she had forgotten she still carried. Ethan stepped back, checking the wagon one more time to make sure it was safe to move. Mara looked at the sky, then at the path leading back to her cabin. "Ethan, I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You already did," he answered, lifting the deer with gentle arms so he could set it safely under the shade of a tree. "Just take care of yourself." Mara watched him, unsure how a stranger could show such care without expecting anything. She felt strangely safe around him, a feeling she had not experienced since losing her husband. Ethan mounted his horse, gave her a polite nod, and turned toward his ranch. Mara stayed still for a long moment, watching his figure shrink into the distance. She had expected this to be a brief, inconvenient moment in her day. Instead, it was the first time in years someone had shown her genuine, simple kindness. She didn't know if she would see Ethan again, but she hoped deep down that this wasn't the last time their paths crossed. What she didn't know was that Ethan, too, felt a quiet tug inside him as he rode away, sensing that something in his life had just changed, even if he couldn't explain how. After their first meeting, Ethan did not expect to cross paths with Mara again. He assumed she would settle in, fix her wagon, and continue her quiet life in the small cabin near the grove. He believed their brief moment of cooperation had ended the way most meetings in the valley did, 2 people helping each other and then moving on. But as days passed, Ethan kept thinking about her. The way she tried to stay strong, even when exhausted. The way her voice trembled, only after she felt safe. The way she thanked him, like she meant it from the deepest part of her heart. He tried to push the thoughts aside and focus on work. Autumn was approaching, and ranch chores grew heavier. But every time he rode out to check the north pasture, his eyes drifted toward the dirt trail that led to her cabin. He told himself he was only being cautious, making sure everything around the ranch stayed safe. Yet he knew that wasn't the full truth. One morning, after a night of restless sleep, he saddled his horse and headed toward the open field. The weather was warm but breezy, carrying the smell of dry leaves. Halfway through his ride, he saw movement near the fence. Someone tall was struggling with a broken rail. It was Mara. Her long frame bent awkwardly as she tried to lift the heavy wood. Her arms were strong, but the beam was uneven and bulky, making the task harder than it appeared. Ethan slowed his horse and watched for a moment. She was determined, that much was clear, but she was also alone, trying to fix a fence that clearly needed two people. Without calling out, Ethan rode closer. The sound of hoofsteps made her stop and lift her head. Her expression changed when she saw him, surprise, mixed with a quiet relief she tried not to show too openly. "You don't have to help," she said quickly, brushing dust off her hands. "I can manage." Ethan dismounted and shook his head gently. "Doesn't look like managing," he replied in a calm voice. Mara sighed, then laughed softly, almost shyly, and stepped aside so he could take over. They lifted the rail together, setting it into place. It took less than a minute with 4 hands, but Mara looked at him as though he had solved a much bigger problem. "You do this every day?" she asked, as she leaned against the post, catching her breath. "More or less," Ethan replied. "Ranch doesn't take care of itself." She smiled faintly. "I'm learning that settled land doesn't either." Ethan studied her face. She still looked tired, but there was more color in her cheeks now compared to when he first found her on the trail. She was adjusting. Slowly. But he could tell the weight of the past still followed her. Her new home was peaceful, but peace didn't erase old pain. He walked along the fence, checking for more damage. Mara followed him, her long steps matching his easily. She began to talk again, not forcing it, not rushing, just letting the words come in a natural flow. She told him about the cabin she lived in. It used to belong to an older couple who moved to town once age caught up with them. She had bought it because it was quiet, far from crowds, and surrounded by tall trees where she could breathe without feeling watched. Ethan listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. He enjoyed the sound of her voice more than he expected. It had a firmness to it, but also a softness hidden deep inside. As they walked, Mara took a long breath and began talking about her husband. Not in a heavy or dramatic way, but simply as someone remembering a part of herself that still mattered. She told Ethan how they had tried to run a homestead far up in the mountains but faced hardship after hardship. When her husband fell sick, she carried most of the work alone. She mentioned how she never complained because she loved him. But when he passed away, everything fell apart. Her direction, her routines, and her purpose. She tried to live in the same place for months. But grief made even the quiet mornings feel heavy. The silence, once comforting, became an ache. That was when she decided to move. Ethan absorbed every word. He didn't pity her. He respected her. Life had not been easy on him either. Losing his parents young, losing the family ranch to fire once, rebuilding alone, fighting drought and storms, loss had shaped him too. Listening to her felt like hearing an echo of his own struggles, though neither of them said it openly. When they reached the end of the fence, Ethan noticed a pile of firewood near her cabin that was cut unevenly. He walked over and inspected the pieces, noticing her axe nearby. "You did this yourself?" he asked. Mara nodded, crossing her arms in a half-defensive way. "It's a mess, I know. I'm still learning." He shook his head. "Not a mess. Just needs practice." She seemed relieved by his gentle tone instead of criticism. Ethan picked up a log and split it smoothly. The clean sound of wood breaking echoed in the still air. Mara watched him quietly, then stepped closer. "Can you show me how you do it?" she asked. He paused, realizing she trusted him enough to ask. "Sure," he said softly. "It's all about balance." For the next half hour, he taught her how to hold the axe properly, how to stand, and how to let the tool do most of the work. Her height actually helped her, but her hesitation made her movements stiff. "Relax your shoulders," Ethan said, stepping beside her but keeping a respectful space. "Don't force it." She adjusted her posture, breathed deeply, and tried again. This time, the wood split neatly. A surprised grin spread across her face, bright, genuine, and unguarded. "I did it," she whispered, pleased. "You did," Ethan said, matching her smile with a small one of his own. For a moment, they simply stood there, sharing a quiet sense of achievement. Neither spoke, but the silence felt warm, not empty. As the sun moved lower, Ethan helped her stack the wood. Mara insisted on doing half of it herself, claiming she didn't want him to think she was helpless. That made Ethan chuckle. "I know you're not helpless," he replied. "Just human." Mara looked at him, her eyes softening. "Sometimes I forget that's allowed." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just kept stacking. But her words stayed in his mind. As the sky turned orange, Ethan prepared to leave. Mara walked him to the trail. Her expression, thoughtful. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Again." "You don't have to thank me every time," Ethan replied. She lifted her chin slightly. "Maybe I do. You've been kinder than most people I've met." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but found no good words. He wasn't used to such honesty. So he nodded instead, a small but sincere gesture. As he rode away, he felt something settle in his chest, a feeling he had not let himself feel in a long time. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something alive. Something warm. Behind him, Mara watched until his figure disappeared into the soft evening light. She didn't fully understand why his presence brought comfort, but she felt it all the same. A small spark of hope. Something new. Something she thought she would never feel again. She whispered to herself, almost smiling. "Maybe I'm not as alone as I thought." Neither of them knew it yet. But this was only the beginning of a bond that would change both of their lives in gentle but powerful ways. The days that followed were strangely warm for the season. The valley air carried the smell of drying grass and distant pine, and the evenings grew softer, more peaceful. Ethan found himself riding near Mara's cabin more often than he intended. He always told himself he was just checking the fences or making sure no coyotes had moved closer to the cattle fields. But deep inside, he knew he was hoping to see her. He didn't admit it to himself. But the truth was there every time he looked toward the grove and felt an unexpected pull in his chest. Mara, too, kept noticing the quiet presence of the rancher in small ways she never expected. Every morning when she stepped outside, she found subtle signs that someone had been nearby. A loose hinge on her gate would be fixed. A fallen branch blocking her path would be moved aside. A small bundle of herbs used for healing small cuts would be left near her porch, wrapped neatly in cloth. Ethan never stayed to explain, never asked for thanks. He simply left the signs of care behind and went on with his day. Mara began to wait for those small signs without meaning to. Each one made her feel seen without feeling pressured. It was a gentle presence, one that felt safe. One late afternoon, when the shadows stretched long and the sky shimmered in soft shades of gold, Mara stepped outside with a basket of laundry. She stopped in surprise when she saw Ethan riding toward her cabin. He looked calm, as always. But she noticed something softer in his eyes. Something almost hopeful. "You're checking fences again?" she asked, trying to hide the smile forming on her lips. "Something like that," Ethan answered, stopping a few steps away. She gave him a knowing look. "I think the fences near my cabin are the safest in the whole valley. Now." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a bit embarrassed, but didn't deny it. Mara found the small gesture unexpectedly charming. Before she could say anything more, a faint rumble of thunder echoed across the distance. Mara looked up. Dark clouds were gathering far on the horizon. They didn't look threatening yet, but they moved faster than normal. "Storm coming," Ethan said quietly. Mara followed his gaze. "I didn't expect one today." "Storms don't ask permission," he said with a small smile. The remark made her laugh gently, easing some of the tension in her shoulders. But as the wind picked up, Mara felt a familiar worry. Her cabin was sturdy, but not perfect. The shutters had been repaired by the old couple before she moved in, and the roof creaked loudly, even during mild winds. Ethan seemed to sense her concern before she even voiced it. "You need help securing things?" he asked. She should have said no. She had always handled tough situations alone. But this time, she didn't want to push him away. She nodded, quietly. They began working together as the wind grew stronger. Ethan helped her close the shutters, replacing a loose hook with a spare nail he carried in his saddlebag. Mara held the ladder steady while he checked the lower part of the roof. When the gusts grew stronger, Ethan came down quickly, not wanting to risk slipping. The first drops of rain began to fall, light, soft, but steady. "Inside," Ethan said gently. Mara hesitated. "I know," he replied, "but I'm staying." There was no argument left in her after hearing those words. She stepped inside the cabin, and Ethan followed, closing the door, against the rising wind. The cabin was small but warm, filled with the soft scent of wood and herbs. Mara lit a lantern, and the glow filled the room with a gentle calm. Ethan stood near the window, listening to the growing rumble outside. The storm grew louder. The wind pushed against the walls, and the roof creaked the way Mara feared. She tried not to show her worry, but Ethan noticed. "You've been through worse, haven't you?" he asked quietly. She nodded slowly. Back on the old homestead, storms were stronger. But I wasn't alone then. Ethan looked at her with understanding. He didn't say anything, but his presence said enough. Mara sat near the small table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Ethan walked over and pulled out a chair across from her, sitting quietly. For a few moments, they simply listened to the storm. The whistle of wind, the thump of branches, and the soft patter of rain against the walls. "Ethan," Mara finally said, her voice low, "why do you keep helping me?" He looked up, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. "Because you need help," he answered simply. "That's not all," she replied. "A lot of people see me and think I'm strong enough to handle everything. I'm tall, I'm built strong, and I can lift almost as much as a grown man. But inside," she paused, her voice unsteady. "Inside, I've been tired for a long time." Ethan sat forward slightly, his gaze steady and warm. "Being strong doesn't mean you never need someone," he said. "It just means you've carried too much alone." Mara felt her throat tighten. She didn't cry, she rarely ever let herself cry, but she felt something soften deeply inside her chest. For the first time in years, someone understood, without her needing to explain everything. The storm outside grew louder, rattling the shutter. Mara flinched slightly, but Ethan remained steady. "You don't have to be afraid," he said gently. "I'm not afraid of the storm," she whispered. "I'm afraid of needing someone again. Every time I did, life took them away." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know that feeling." Mara looked at him in surprise. "When I lost my parents," Ethan continued, "I stopped letting people close. I thought that was safer. But safe doesn't mean happy." His words hung in the air, quiet but powerful. Mara lowered her gaze and exhaled deeply. She didn't need to reply. He understood her silence. The storm slowly softened. The heavy rumble faded into a distant growl, and the wind eased into gentle breezes. Rain continued, but it was calmer now, like a soft curtain falling over the valley. Ethan stood and checked the window again. "It's passing." Mara looked relieved but also grateful. She did not want him to leave immediately, though she didn't say so aloud. Ethan sensed something in her expression and stayed near the table. "You don't have to hide your worries around me," he said in a quiet voice. "I'm not here to judge you." Mara held his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't look away. There was something warm in Ethan's eyes, something steady, something honest. It made her feel lighter, like she could breathe fully again. The storm ended completely by the time the lantern's flame began to dim. Mara walked Ethan to the door, the wood floor creaking softly under their feet. "Thank you," she said, her voice gentle and sincere. "You don't need to thank me," Ethan repeated, but this time, there was a warmth behind the words. "I'm glad to help." She smiled softly, something rare but beautiful on her face. Ethan stepped outside, and the air smelled fresh, washed clean by the rain. As he mounted his horse, he looked back one last time. Mara stood at the door, her tall figure framed by the warm glow inside the cabin. She lifted her hand in a small wave. Ethan returned the gesture, then rode off slowly. That night, they both lay awake longer than usual, thinking of the same thing. The storm that brought them closer, the quiet comfort of shared fear, and the unexpected bond forming between them. Neither knew what the future held, but both felt that something important had begun. Something steady, something gentle, and something they were both quietly grateful for. The morning after the storm was bright and cool. Drops of water clung to the grass, shining like tiny beads under the rising sun. Birds returned to their branches, singing as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. But inside Mara's cabin, things felt different. She woke up feeling lighter, as if a weight she had carried for too long had shifted. She still remembered the sound of the storm and the fear that came with it, but she also remembered Ethan sitting across from her, calm and steady. She made tea slowly, thinking of the rancher more than she wanted to admit. She admired his quiet strength, the way he didn't push or demand, the way he helped without expecting anything in return. She found herself smiling softly, a rare expression she hadn't worn in a long time. Ethan, meanwhile, spent the morning fixing a broken barn door that the storm had loosened. But his thoughts were far from the barn. He kept remembering the look in Mara's eyes when she spoke about her fears, and the small relief she felt when he stayed beside her. Something inside him, something careful and guarded, had opened slightly during that moment. He didn't fully understand it, but he didn't push it away either. By noon, he found himself riding toward the grove again. He told himself he was checking after the storm, making sure there were no fallen trees or wild animals near her cabin. But he knew it was more than that. He wanted to see her. When he reached the path leading to her cabin, he saw her outside, attempting to lift a heavy bucket of water from the well. She was strong, but the bucket was full, and the ground was still muddy, making it difficult. Ethan slowed his horse and watched quietly for a moment. Mara braced her legs and tried again, but the bucket slipped and splashed water over her boots. She sighed in frustration and pushed her wet hair back from her forehead. Ethan dismounted. "Need help?" Mara turned quickly, startled and then embarrassed. "I didn't say I had to," Ethan replied calmly. "I asked if you needed help." She hesitated, then stepped aside with a tired smile. Ethan lifted the bucket with ease and carried it to her porch. Mara watched him with gratitude, but also something warmer. She felt safe around him, and that scared her a little. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're welcome." Mara leaned against the porch rail and looked out at the forest. For a long moment, they simply stood there, listening to the gentle breeze sweeping through the trees. Then Mara took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "I don't want you to think I can't take care of myself. I've been doing everything alone for years." "I know," Ethan answered. "You're strong. Anyone can see that." "Then why?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Why do I feel like I'm failing when I ask for help?" Ethan took a few seconds before replying. "Because you've had no one to rely on. When you're alone for too long, you start to believe needing help is something to be ashamed of. But it's not." Mara looked at him, her tall frame softening. "Do you ever feel that way?" He nodded slowly. "More times than I can count. After my family passed, I kept everyone at a distance. I thought depending on anyone would only lead to more pain." He paused, then met her eyes. "But sometimes, letting someone in is the only way to heal." Mara lowered her gaze to the porch floor. She didn't cry, she seldom allowed herself to, but her chest felt tight with unspoken emotions. She had never expected anyone to understand her struggles. Not like this. Ethan saw the conflict in her face, and his voice softened. Mara, you don't have to carry everything alone anymore. She looked up sharply, almost startled by the weight of his words. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind rustled the leaves, sending a faint whisper across the clearing. Mara broke the silence first, though her voice trembled slightly. Ethan, every time someone cared about me, life took them away. I lost my parents when I was young. I lost my husband. I don't know if I can handle losing someone again. Ethan stepped closer, carefully. I can't promise what life will bring, he said gently. Nobody can. But I can promise that I won't disappear just because life gets hard. Mara's lips parted, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. She turned away slightly, staring at the trees for strength. Ethan didn't push her. He waited, respecting her space as always. After a long pause, she finally said, I'm not used to people staying. Then let me be the first. Ethan replied quietly. She looked at him again. This time, her eyes didn't hold fear, they held something fragile but hopeful. A small smile formed on her lips, the kind that came from a heart warming after a long, cold season. Ethan helped her finish carrying the water, then noticed a pile of heavy logs near the side of her cabin. Mara followed his gaze and sighed. I was trying to move those before the storm. I didn't get far. 2,000. All of the matter. No. I can help with that, Ethan said. You've already done enough. He shook his head. I'm not keeping score. Mara laughed softly, the sound warm and unexpected. She stepped aside as Ethan began lifting the logs, stacking them neatly under the shelter. She joined him with smaller pieces, working beside him in comfortable silence. As they worked, Mara told him more about her life, little memories she had avoided speaking about for years. Funny stories from her old homestead, quiet moments she shared with her husband, and even dreams she once had before life grew heavy. Ethan listened, truly listened, and never once made her feel judged. By the time the sun began to dip behind the trees, they were both seated on the porch, tired but comfortable. Mara hugged her knees close to her chest and watched the sky turn orange and pink. I can't remember the last time I talked this much, she admitted. That's not a bad thing, Ethan replied. I guess not, she said, looking at him. With you, it feels easy. Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, deeper than he expected. With you, he said quietly, it feels easy too. Mara's smile deepened. Something unspoken but undeniably real passed between them, a quiet understanding. A connection that neither could ignore anymore. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rushed. It was gentle, honest, and slow, like two people learning how to trust again after years of silence. As evening settled around them, Mara rested her back against the porch post, feeling more at peace than she had in years. Ethan watched her for a moment, noticing how the fading light softened the lines of her strong face. You're stronger than you think, he said. And you're kinder than you believe, she answered. Their eyes met. And for a long moment, the world around them felt still. Everything they had carried, fear, loss, loneliness, felt lighter, not gone, but shared. Ethan stood reluctantly when he saw the sky growing darker. I should head back before it gets too late. Mara nodded but didn't rise from her place on the porch. I'm glad you came, she said simply. So am I. He mounted his horse, and Mara watched him ride away, her heart strangely calm. She whispered to herself, maybe, I can let someone in again. And for the first time, in a long time, she believed it. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a gentle rhythm for both Ethan and Mara. Their days were separate, but their paths crossed so naturally that it felt almost like the valley itself was guiding them toward each other. Every morning, Mara found new confidence in her routines, and every evening, Ethan found himself thinking of her cabin near the grove. They did not speak every day, but whenever they met, the comfort between them grew stronger. One cool morning, Mara decided to ride her small wagon into town for supplies. The storm had taken some of her stored goods, and she needed flour, oil, and a few tools to repair her chicken coop. She left early, hoping to return before sunset. The trail was smooth at first, the wheels rolling easily across the dry ground. But halfway back, trouble found her again. A deep rut in the path caught her wagon wheel at the wrong angle. The wood cracked sharply, and the wagon lurched forward before stopping altogether. Mara stumbled, but caught herself on the side rail. She checked the wheel and sighed heavily. It was badly damaged, far worse than anything she could fix alone on the road. She looked at the sky. Evening was approaching faster than she expected. The glow of late afternoon made the trees look peaceful, but the idea of being stranded too close to nightfall made her uneasy. She tried lifting the wagon by herself, but even with her strength, the weight and angle were too much. She tried again, bracing her feet firmly, pulling with all her might. The wagon only shifted slightly before slipping back, nearly knocking her off balance. She wiped sweat from her forehead and tried to steady her breathing. She didn't want to feel helpless, not after all the progress she had made. But the more she struggled, the clearer it became this was not a task she could finish alone. Just when frustration began to rise in her chest, she heard the familiar sound of hoofsteps approaching from the distance. Slow, steady, and unhurried. She turned, and her breath caught when she saw Ethan riding toward her. His calm figure appearing like an answer she didn't dare expect. He slowed his horse and jumped down before the animal even stopped moving completely. "You all right?" he asked, concern soft but clear in his voice. Mara tried to smile, though embarrassment colored her cheeks. Ethan walked to the wagon, crouched beside the damaged wheel, and examined it. His expression softened into something between understanding and gentle amusement. "This isn't your fault," he said. "The trail's rough here. Anyone would have had trouble." "I should have been more careful," she muttered, frustrated with herself. "You were careful," Ethan replied. "You're just trying to do everything alone again." Mara opened her mouth to argue but stopped when she saw the warm look in his eyes. Ethan stood and dusted off his hands. "Let me help." Before she could respond, he moved to the back of the wagon, gripped the wooden frame, and lifted it with a strength that made Mara blink. His muscles tightened, his boots dug into the dirt, and slowly, almost effortlessly, the heavy wagon rose several inches off the ground. Mara stared in disbelief. She had known Ethan was strong, but not like this. She had struggled with the wagon for nearly 10 minutes, barely moving it an inch. Yet here he was, lifting it alone, steady as a mountain. She hurried to adjust the broken wheel, placing a wooden block underneath to keep it balanced. Ethan held the wagon until she stepped back and said, "Okay." He lowered it gently, his breathing even, as if the task hadn't strained him at all. Mara shook her head slowly, still surprised. "What?" Ethan asked with a half-smile. "You shocked me," she said honestly. "I didn't think anyone could lift it like that." "I told you before," he replied, brushing dirt from his hands. "You don't have to do everything alone." The simple truth in his voice made her chest warm. She watched him pull out tools from his saddlebag, tools he carried not for himself, but for moments just like this for strangers, travelers, ranch hands. And now, she realized, for her. While he repaired the wheel, Mara sat on a nearby rock, just watching him work. There was something peaceful in the way Ethan moved, focused, steady, quietly determined. He didn't boast. He didn't rush. He just helped because it was in his nature. "You always show up at the right time," Mara said softly. Ethan didn't look up. but she saw the faint smile forming on his lips. Maybe the valley tells me where to go. And the valley points you toward me? Seems like it, he said, glancing her way with warm eyes. Mara's heart softened in a way she hadn't let herself feel for anyone since her husband passed. It wasn't sudden or overwhelming. It was slow, gentle, like a sunrise spreading light across the land. When the wheel was fixed, Ethan dusted off his hat and stood. Try it now. Mara climbed into the wagon and urged the horse forward. The wheel rolled smoothly, as if it had never been broken. She stopped the wagon beside him and looked down with deep gratitude. You've done so much for me, she said, her voice unsteady. I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to repay anything, Ethan replied. I help because I want to. Because I care. Her breath caught. She didn't expect him to say it so honestly, so simply. No fear, no hesitation. Just truth. Ethan stepped closer, placing his hand gently on the side of the wagon. Mara leaned forward, her eyes meeting his. The world around them felt quieter than the open valley usually did, as if everything had paused to let them breathe in this moment. You don't have to be alone anymore, Mara, he said softly. Not if you don't want to be. Her throat tightened. For years, she had built walls around herself, believing it was safer that way. But this man, this steady, gentle rancher, had been breaking those walls without force or pressure. He broke them with kindness. Mara climbed down from the wagon and stood in front of him. She wasn't sure what emotion pushed her forward, relief, hope, fear, or gratitude. But she knew she didn't want to hide behind silence anymore. I don't want to be alone, she whispered. Not anymore. Ethan nodded, his eyes warm and full of understanding. Then, you won't be. They didn't embrace. They didn't rush. They simply stood close, sharing a connection built over weeks of quiet help, shared storms, and unexpected comfort. Ethan walked beside her as she led the wagon home. Their steps matched easily, like two people already learning the rhythm of life together. When they reached her cabin, the sun was dipping behind the trees, filling the world with a soft golden light. Mara turned to him and said, Will you stay for supper? Ethan smiled. I'd like that. For the first time in years, Mara felt her home fill with warmth that wasn't just from the fire. And for Ethan, the cabin near the grove felt less like a stranger's place and more like somewhere he belonged. As night settled and gentle laughter filled the cabin, the valley outside grew quiet and peaceful. Two people who once carried heavy loneliness now shared something simple and strong, a new beginning. Something real. Something safe. Something that felt like a future.